that, I'm going to welcome you to the second ARS seminar. Our guest today is Dr. Bonnie Nardi, and as you can see from her slide, she's from the School of Informatics and Computer Science at UC Irvine. She was, however, trained as an anthropologist. She received her undergraduate degree from Berkeley and her PhD from the School of Social Sciences at UC Irvine in 1977. Among her anthropological pursuits, she spent a year in Western Samoa doing research. But she also has a, can I say, checkered career. She spent a number of years in industry. She has worked at AT&T Labs, Agilent Technologies, and Apple Labs before she got inspired to come back to academia. And her work is generally in the area of human-computer interaction, computer-supported cooperative work, and interaction design, as well as what we'll hear about today, the World of Warcraft. She's the author of 5 books. One of her earliest well-known books from 1998 is entitled Information Ecology, Using Technology with Art. And she wrote that while she was a researcher at AT&T Labs. Her most recent published work is Acting with Technology, Activity Theory and Interaction Design, using embodied activity theory. In addition, a book on her research on the World Wide Web is due to be published in June of this year. The title is intriguing. My Life as a Night Elf Priest, an Anthropological Account of the World of Warcraft. Dr. Nardi does not have a microphone, so we're going to ask people to open your chips now and go the crackling of the papers and try to generally keep the volume down so everyone will be able to hear her well. All right? So with that, I'm looking forward to this very welcome, Dr. Nardi.
Okay, well, thank you, Janet, and thank you very much for inviting me here. This is a great opportunity to speak. I want to talk today about 2 areas of activity surrounding World of Warcraft that are sites of public discussion about values and identity. I think popular culture is generally the flashpoint for these kinds of discussions that let us examine cultural divides and cultural anxieties. And the first activity I'll talk about is the production by players of free software extensions to World of Warcraft, and the second one is gold farming, that is turning game money into real money. And these activities concern our virtual lives, certainly, but more broadly, they also convey images that we have of ourselves and others in the global economy. And I'll argue that they embody what we can call imaginaries, that is, representations that fascinate us, that engage reason and emotion, and that have a touch of the illusory. Now, I want to begin with a quick tour of World of Warcraft. How many are generally familiar with World of Warcraft? Okay, so not that many, so this will actually be useful. Okay, so World of Warcraft, or WoW, as it is known, is a fantasy game based on a medieval theme. It's a very popular game. There's about 11.5 million players playing it worldwide. Half of them are in China. It's available in 9 languages. And it's produced by Blizzard Entertainment, which happens to be right in my backyard in Irvine. So I found it fascinating from the very beginning that here's this game produced in Southern California that's played literally all over the world in people's favorite languages. WoW is a role-playing game, so you can create a character, you take it on quests, which are little missions. They're adventures like slaying monsters or finding a treasure, and you move through a vast 3D geography. It's very colorful, very beautiful. Blizzard artists have won awards for the artwork. WoW is not just slaying monsters, though. You also make money and trade and engage in professions like herbalism and blacksmithing, kind of medievally tinged things. There's a drive in the game to improve your equipment, things that you acquire for your character. They're called armor and weapons, and this is to empower your character so that you can play more effectively. And it's a game with levels, so you start at level 1, and in the current game you go through level 8. You choose a character type, so here's a picture of one of my characters. This is a priest. And she's a healing priest. There's no religious connotation to priest in World of Warcraft. It means to restore the health of other players as they being attacked by the monsters or by other players. players. But she also likes to fish and cook, and she's an alchemist, and she does that. So in the game, there are 10 different character types like this, and that fosters group play because people have different abilities and it makes you more effective when you group together with other people who do things that are different than what you can do. All right, very quick video here. This is a Blizzard video. It just gives you a sense of kind of the color and the movement and the sparkles. See in the video, there were lots of players coming together to slay that dragon. And that's pretty typical for WoW. It's a very social game. People communicate in text and voice chat. And collaborations, the activities in the game are recorded on collaborations with 2 to 40 people. It seems to have settled out at about 25 people. That seems to be a practical size. And many of the current game activities include 25, like in the picture here. So in order to play the game more effectively, people form guilds, which are like clubs. So this is a name for people that you play with. There's a guild chat channel. So you're interacting a lot with the people who are in your guild. You can have up to 500 people. Most guilds are a lot smaller. The current guild I'm in, where I'm playing the most, is about 200 people. And there's probably about 75 or 80 that are really active who I see when I log in. So that's kind of the size of the social space. Many guilds are okay, methods. How do I do this research? As Janet said, I'm an anthropologist. So I wanted to immerse myself in the video about the information, try to understand what it's all about. I'm certainly not your typical video game player, and I got involved in this research because about 4 years ago, I kept hearing the undergraduate students talk about video games, talk about World of Warcraft, and since I study social life on the internet, I thought, okay, I better learn a little bit about these games so that I'll be conversant. And certainly never expected to go drawn into World of Warcraft and to find it such an interesting object of study. So I've created characters, I joined guilds. I've done a lot of interviewing. That's one of my main methods as an anthropologist. Most of my interviews have been offline. I tend to really like the face-to-face interviews. I find those richer. But I've also done some online. And certainly there are some people who can only interview online. But there's so many students that play World of Warcraft, it's really easy to find people doing it. This was never a problem. And then you have to kind of branch up. There's an in-game function to collect the chat logs, so I have thousands of pages of these chat logs. I don't collect them every time I sit down now, but for many years I would always type chat logs every time I sit down. So they build up quickly. There's a lot of collateral materials, kind of paratexts, as some people call them, about World of Warcraft. So I've also spent a lot of time reading websites and forums and blogs and news articles related to the game. So it's not confined to the game itself. There's a lot of important activity. In fact, both things we'll talk about today actually take place outside the game. All right, now that was pretty quick and dirty about World of Warcraft. For those who don't play, any simple questions about what it is? Because I don't want to continue to talk about it if people are like really confused about. Okay, yeah.
It's still somewhat difficult to hear you just due to the size of the room.
Yeah.
I wonder if it would be possible to just belt it out a little bit.
I can try. I'll try to talk more loudly, but I really can't talk much louder than this. I just assumed I would have a mic because I'm being recorded, so I didn't ask that. So I apologize for that.
Oh, no, not at all. Thank you.
If you want to come up, there's more places close to you.
All right, so let me talk about this first activity, which is the activity of modding. And mods are player-created software extensions to the game. So this is typical of a lot of video games, that you can create small bits of software and insert them into the game. And when you log in, these mods will be there, and they change your play experience. So players have experiences in the game, and they say, I think I'd like to do it this way. I'd like to see this little bit of information. Here's a bit of functionality that's not in the game that I would like. And the games are open enough that you can do this, or the people that know how to program can write these. And they're made available for free download on the internet. So this really actually changes the player experience quite a lot, because you're not just getting the commercial product, you're also getting these player-created software modifications. And a lot of this research is based on what my student Hao has been doing. He's studying modding in China and North America. And he's spent a lot of time hanging out in the chat channels that others hang out in. That's where they tend to socialize and talk about technical things. He has done a lot of interviews mostly in California, and also he went to China last year, and participant observation. So this is a little bit of a collage of some of the pictures that he took when he was here's some pictures of mods, so you'll know what they look like. A lot of what they do is to bring to the surface information that's in the game that you don't see, but that's very useful. A lot of it's quantitative, like you see in these charts here. So players want to know, how much damage am I doing to the monster? How much healing am I doing? And there are other quantities in the game that are not expressed in the commercial product that people want to have access to. And so players write mods about these things. And some games allow you to modify them. You can actually write a whole new game. And other ones, you can only do a little bit. WoW is kind of intermediate. You can do quite a bit of customization, but there's many things that you cannot change about the game. So this this activity of players creating new content in the game brings up the question of who owns the mods. For the most part, the modders are doing the work for free, and they're making the mods available for free download on the internet. Now, some mods have asked for donations or developed premium versions, and this does involve an exchange of money. I think mods add a lot of value to the game. I don't know how you would quantify this exactly, but I do know that if millions of people are downloading and using these things on a daily basis, that this is definitely adding to Blizzard's bottom line. And there's about 4,000 mods, so there's quite a collection of these things out there that represent a lot of value. Now, for its part, Blizzard answers modders' questions on an official forum and provides an add-ons folder, so when you get your add-on, you can just drop it in the folder and it's right there when you log in. But that's about all they do to support modding. That's pretty much it for narrative. All the other infrastructure is provided by the modding community. And that includes download sites that collect the mods, so you don't have to find them all over the internet. Wikis. There's quite an elaborate programming framework. There are the chat room communities, and there's even a guide to modding published by a mainstream publisher. So there's a lot of value there for the modding community. A little bit about the history. When the game was released, there wasn't any support of any kind at all for mods. And shortly after the launch, players made known that they wanted to start doing this, and Blizzard said on their forum, there's no official support for modifying the WoW interface. If you break it, you get to keep all the pieces. So in a way, this actually led to the development of a very autonomous community, where modders felt that they could kind of do what they wanted to do. They were very independent. They called their community sandbox, and they kind of want to keep that boundary around their sandbox. Now, over time, relations between Blizzard and modders grew more friendly. And there's usually a session at the annual Blizzard conference, BlizzCon, called the UI and Mod session, where modders and Blizzard have some interesting conversations. And this is a picture on the couch of the modders only get to see each other face-to-face once a year, and that's at BlizzCon. And they usually have a day at Disneyland, and this is them. And I'm afraid this picture does a little to dispel the notion of modders as pretty geeky types, but that's what they look like. All right. Now, I was pretty surprised that modders don't mind when Blizzard takes their ideas and incorporates them directly into the game. So you see a lot of features in the game that came directly from the modern community. And they're not taking the code, of course, they're just taking the idea and then recoding it. So for example, in the picture with the combination of the boots, you see the sell price down there at the bottom of that image. It used to be you had to download a mod in order to find out how much that particular item was worth in the economy. And Blizzard said, that's a good idea, let's put that in. So now you see it right in the game. And there's a lot of stuff like this in the game. So Donnie Howe interviewed one of the leading modders in Cogwheel. These people tend to go by their own aliases. And he said, my first add-on FlexBar was an answer to a bunch of forum questions on how to cast a spell on yourself because there was no way to simply cast a spell on yourself. When 2.0 came out, they added the macro option system which allows you to fix spells. So that was my first add-on, and also my first add-on to be made obsolete by a patch. So this is actually a badge of honor in the modding community to have your mod taken and incorporated into the game. And I think it's a pretty authentic form of co-production between players and Blizzard in terms of the actual product. So, like I said, things were going along pretty well, but on March 20th of last year, modders were very perturbed when the autonomy of the sandbox was threatened when Blizzard issued new policies in response to some in-game advertising in mods. So some of the mods, when you saw them in the game, you also saw an ad to ask for a donation or to buy the premium version. And this was very upsetting to Blizzard. So they issued a bunch of policies, and I'm going to talk about two of them. The first one was add-ons must be free of charge. Developers may not create premium versions of add-ons with additional for-pay features. Charge money to download an add-on, charge for services related to the add-on, or otherwise require some form of monetary compensation to download or access an add-on. And the other one that was disturbing to the community was add-ons may not solicit donations. We recognize the immense amount of effort and resources that go into developing an add-on. However, such requests should be limited to the add-on website or distribution site and should not appear in the game. Now it's a little funny because most modders were not making any money on their mods, and they had never intended to, so it didn't really directly affect them. But there was this very strong sense that the bounds of the autonomous community had been breached. And so there was just a ton of stuff on the forum, kind of emotional outpouring about these policies. And I'll read you a few to give you a flavor. So actually, this one is from an interview. For a long time, Blizzard made no attempt to influence the add-on community in any way other than to maintain the sandbox we played in. The tacit agreement was that we could develop add-ons for them that would help both us have fun and them make more money. There's one popular mod named Pitbull that I know it's been downloaded millions of times. The author never charged, but he was very upset and he posted no longer doing add-on work due to UI add-on development policy. Another wrote, the author community collectively believed that Blizzard was well sane and didn't actually believe they owned everything. Now that they're threatening to sue over it, this assumption no longer holds if it ever did. And another said, I can see many of the developers out there with this mindset. Well, I used to code add-ons just for the fun of it, but now that they tell me I have to do it for free, screw them. I won't do it. So this is the kind of boundary that had been broken by Blizzard that really upset the modders who were doing all this amazing work for the player community and really directly for Blizzard. But it got worse after that. So on April 2nd, Cogwheel, our leading modder, who had been somewhat critical of the policies, was censored. All of his posts were deleted from the forum, and he had written this really nice guide to modding, which was beloved in the modding community. That was pulled down also from the forum. So he responded, sure, I've expressed myself with great passion and want to threads about policy change. I haven't made any overtly hostile posts on Facebook, and I've continued to post helpful responses in threads where I can be helped. However, whatever hostility I wasn't feeling over the ban earlier today is now here in full force. As soon as my obligations with the book, this is the book programming are over, I'm canceling my subscription. Thank you for adding further insult to injury. So he was really pretty upset. And there were other posts that were also deleted from the forum, those who were critical of the new policies. So what we see here is this conflict between two interlocking communities. I mean, I still think of them in my mind as being separate communities. Those are on the one hand, the models on the other, but very, very interrelated, very entangled with one another. And when this issue of the advertising medium came up, Blizzard came down very hard with legal maneuvers and by censoring some of the people who had been most valuable in the community. So the illusions were shattered. The belief that Blizzard was sane is clearly no longer true. This imaginary that the modders had carried around with them that inspired them to do some of their work was defeated, at least for the moment. So these actions on Blizzard's part, these policies, did not kill the modding community, but I think they didn't do anything to foster creativity and energy in that community. And they kind of put a damper, they kind of stalled the kind of co-production that was evolving in interesting ways in this community, things that were taking on some pretty positive kinds of developments. And two actions in particular were squashed by these policies, and I want to talk about those. One was the continued development of complex add-ons that did require full-time commitment and that did need payment for the modders. And the second one was the development of add-ons for add-ons. So this is kind of a natural evolution toward complexity in the modding community. There's a mod called Quest Helper, which is the most popular mod. It's been downloaded 23 million times or something in that range. And it has supported its author, Zorba Hood, with donations that were based on an in-game ad that presented on login. Now, this is an unusually complex mod. It has about 23,000 lines of code. Most of them are much smaller. And so Zorba had to continuously update and improve this mod and develop very complicated algorithms. And every single week he recompiled and compressed the mod to generate a new version. So it was kind of approaching commercial quality. And we interviewed him, and he said he was going to stop after the policies. He said, well, I've got a lot of ideas that I'm simply not going to get to. The new policies reduced my incoming donations quite a bit and eliminated some ways I was thinking about getting more income later. One of the things I thought interesting about Quest Helper was that I might be able to form a business around it. I don't think that's possible anymore, and so once the next version is done, I'm probably going to largely stop working on it. Before the policy change, I had a lot of future plans without a real end date in sight. Now I've got an end date, and a lot of those plans will probably never happen. So he had hoped to foster a development community around this very popular mod, and he was developing some software that would enable people to write add-ons for the add-on. So it seems to me that removing these options for expansion and commercialization, which would be the natural evolution of this community, kind of just stopped in their tracks these emergent developments that might have been very positive for the players and actually for Blizzard. And this issue of who owns the mods ended up centering not on exploitation of labor, which is kind of what you would think at first blush that these people are doing almost for free, but on issues of autonomy and mutual respect between these communities. And so I kind of expect to see more of that as other communities in cyberspace come into conflict with different agendas, interlocking but somewhat different agendas. And I think this raises some interesting issues that need further exploration on how we form and sustain communities online, how those communities envision themselves, how they interact with related communities, and how they continue to evolve and grow. All right. So the story is not over. The modding community is still out there. But I think the tensions and negotiations are clearer, and everybody's kind of grown up in a slightly uncomfortable way. So we'll see where this goes in the future, and we have a paper that's coming out later this year on this topic. Okay, so now we want to turn to the second arena of activity around World of Warcraft, which is gold farming. As you know, these games have online economies, virtual money. In WoW, it happens to be gold and silver and copper. If you look down in the corner there, you can see the gold and silver and copper. But virtual goods and currency can be sold for real money on the internet. And the practice of gold farming, very broadly defined, is the production of game gold or the collection of virtual resources that are traded for actual currency like dollars. Players spend real money on these things. This has never seemed weird to me, but everyone else finds it really weird. I feel like you can buy anything, so why not stuff in a game? But the reason that people do this is because they want to move through the game more quickly, and if you have money, you can often do that. Or they have a character and they want to buy some piece of equipment that may cost a lot of gold, and yes, they can get it themselves in the game, but it'll be faster just to buy it. So that's the motivation for buying these things in a game. And people are spending many, many hours in these games. It's a major leisure activity. So I don't think it's really any different than buying a movie ticket. But somehow this has captured our imaginations to be very strange. But that's why people do it. Now, all of this activity is against the terms of service. So if you do this, if you buy gold, you can have your account taken away. And players are aware of that, and players do get their accounts taken away. But it's really hard to police this, and so this industry continues because it's very, very hard to manage this. Now, what I want to talk about here, though, is how we have formed an image of gold farming and how it's come to be seen as something Chinese, and something Chinese in a very particular way. So I went to China in 2007 because half of all WoW players are Chinese, and I wanted to study ordinary players. And when I tell people I went to China, they invariably say, oh, you went to study Chinese gold farming. In fact, Cindy said that to me this morning. And so further proving is true. So I went to study ordinary players because I was really interested that half of our community resides in China. But this imaginary about the Chinese gold farmer has a tremendous amount of power, and I want to talk about that. So I'm using a concept from Bueno, techno-orientalism. He says, the basis of Orientalism is the subordination of others in various areas of the world through a sort of mirror cultural conceit. So popular culture, the mainstream media, and academic discourse cast Chinese as low-tech laborers in a high-tech world. And I think what's going on here, why this meme has stuck, is that we're kind of negotiating our own global identity as a technically advanced region here in the West, in part by constructing the Chinese as participating in virtual worlds in a backward sort of way. And I'll talk about some of those representations, and then I'll talk about what I think is a more complex reality based on some field research that Nardi has done. All right, so first I'll start with the player response to gold farming. Now, players know about gold farmers, and they don't like them because they supposedly upset server economies. And I'm not an expert. Dimitri can probably tell you whether this is true or not. But there is some indication that they can create imbalances because they're doing things that are not planned in the game economy. And you're all familiar with Machinima. This is making videos where you record events in the game, and then they're edited and altered. And I'm going to show you this Ni Hao Gold Farmer story video. But I want to call out, and it's very popular, post programming downloads, and how you start rating YouTube. I want to call out these lyrics before I show it because I think they're kind of the essence of what's going on in these. So, where did all the doggies and kitty cats go since the gold farmers started to show? Don't want to know what's in the egg roll. And they keep coming back because you're giving them down. Take one down, and I felt inspired. Corpse camp until this China man gets fired. That's one farmer they'll have to replace. Not supposed to be here in the first place. I don't know any other way to convey how much we wish you'd all just go away. So please tell us how you really feel. Okay, so this is really pretty strong stuff here. All right. So let me show this. It does have a catchy tune.
Long weeks, many days, long hours, I see them, when you leave them falling. I see you falling, tunnels and shadows and valleys. Then sometimes I was with money when you're Chinese. I'm by your action, you saw my home and back to me. It's like you're bending me over. You smile and say, me home, and bump and go, me home. Your actions slow, me home. It's getting old, me home. Oh, me home, and bump and go, me home. Your it's getting on.
Fire elemental, ready to attack now. Saving all my gold fucking bodies that we found now. Got a shut bolt, but the mob's already gone down. They always try to get bought up, I'm running down. IP's making bank now. Some people are trying bank now. And my failure later always smack down. I can kind of call everybody checking me out.
I see fallen tunnels and shadows and valleys. 10 cents an hour is good money when you're Chinese. I buy your options, you sell my gold right back to me. It's like you're bending me over. You smile and say, ni hao, and pop some gold. Ni hao, that's my purple. Ni hao, it's getting on. Ni hao, ni hao, and pop some gold. Ni hao, that's my purple. Ni hao, it's getting on. Ni hao,
Looks like another gold farmer taking my quest on while the mobs are gone. Waiting on a respawn that I won't get, so I must admit I get sick of it. Where the other doggies and kitty cats go? 6 gold farmers started to show. Don't wanna know what's in the egg ball. They keep coming back cause you're giving them dough. Take one down and I felt inspired. Wolves getting killed, trying to make it fired. That's what farmers will have to replace. I'm supposed to be here in the first place. I don't know any other way to convey how much you wish it all just go away.
Okay, so I think you get the point. Pretty raw stuff. So in this video, and Lisa Nakamura has done a nice analysis of this, if anyone's interested in more discussion here. The way the gold farmers are portrayed is as low wage, they say over and over, 10 cents an hour. Low tech, if you notice they have the shovels and the picks. Low culture, these people are eating dogs and cats. They're disruptive in the game, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere, I'm sick of it, and they're very, very unwelcome. Now the one bit of self-reflection, I think, in this video is the lyrics, and they keep coming back because you're giving them dough. So we are, in fact, implicated with the Chinese gold farmers, we, the American players in this case, and we are, in fact, paying them. But overall, it's pretty racist stuff. And I think this level of resentment that is expressed in this video is because many, well, there's probably a lot of complex reasons, but many WoW players are young, many are not well educated, many are economically marginal, and I think there's a lot of anxiety about their own economic prospects, and the fact that these people from this other big country are coming into the virtual world and making money in a pretty clever way, actually, is cause for resentment and hostility and anxiety. And that requires a lot of empirical work. That's kind of an interpretation on my part. And I believe Lisa Nakamura actually is planning to do some empirical research. But very clear about how these Chinese gold farmers are portrayed in this video. And again, 5 million downloads and 5-star rating. Now, I guess I did expect a little bit better from the mainstream media and academia, and it is a little bit better. But in many ways, there's a very similar presentation of Chinese gold farmers in these two arenas. You see the same emphasis on low wages, on low tech, on low culture, and ubiquity. Yes, question?
Can you explain what the gold farming thing is again?
Yes, okay, sorry. Okay, so gold farming is when you generate wealth in the game, and remember the backpack with the gold, you can generate game gold through activities, or you could just collect a lot of resources in the game, and you can sell those for real money. So there are internet sites. And if you want to buy some gold because there's something you want to buy in the game, you can go and pay $10 or $15 or whatever and get quite a lot of game gold. If there's a particular item in the game that you want that you don't have time to get yourself, you can buy some of those items. So it's a crossover between real money and game money and game wealth. Does that make sense? So it's pretty easy. You just go to one of these sites, and I've been dying to try it, but I'm afraid because of the terms of service, I might lose my account, and that would be very bad, so I haven't done it. Okay, so in the mainstream media, in academic discourse, we see some of the same themes that we saw in the Nihao video, much more sophisticated, much more subtle, but similar. Now, a lot of my discussion is going to revolve around a paper written by Richard Heeks at Manchester. There's no single peer-reviewed article, as Heeks points out, about Chinese gold farming, but he did this kind of working paper, which is pretty amazing, and he looked at everything, as far as I can tell, that's available on the internet. And he said, no academic articles, so this kind of imaginary has taken root. I don't know exactly where from. Very weak empirical base, but like the 5 million downloads, there is this fascination with the Chinese gold farmer. And Heeks reports that information is coming from blogs, from comments on blogs, from places like the New York Times, articles in trade presses, and interestingly, a series of 3 videos made by a former student at UCSD. The low wage theme is sounded over and over and over again. Gold farmers are said to work 7 days a week, 12 hours a day for not very much money. They only get a few days off a month. The notion of the sweatshop is invoked often, and this is based on Julian DeBell's work. There was an article in Wired in 2003 where he talked about virtual sweatshops. So here's a recent, so I've been thinking, okay, well this must just be because all this stuff came out in 2006. And I've been trying to look at the more recent discussions, and still I'm seeing the same kind of imaginary. So there's a recent article in The Guardian, and they say, in a more measured way, but still, the jury is still out on whether this industry is spawning a new generation of virtual sweatshops, or whether it's a massive opportunity for countries seeking to develop through the high-tech economy. So we're not letting go yet of this idea of the virtual sweatshop. Many Chinese gold farmers are portrayed as what academics call playgoers, that is, people who are working and playing at the same time. So Heeks, now I like Heeks' article a lot, but he's a little captivated, I think, by the imaginary. He says, what do gold farmers actually do? They sit at an internet-connected PC and they play an online game for the purposes of making real money. So this indicates that the work is low-skilled, in fact, it's just play, and requires only the PC. And the body is brought into this description of sitting in front of the computer. Okay, I have to pop out. I want to show you a video, and it goes by very fast. It's only like a minute. It's on the New York Times site. It's made by Julian DeBell. And it gets at these things in very condensed form. And I'm sorry, I have to leave PowerPoint to do this. I couldn't figure out any way to download this New York Times video, but I think we've got it here. Okay, so here it hopefully is. Okay, Jim, what's going on here? Remember we queued this up?
It looks like it's
paused. Oh, it's just doing its thing. Okay. All right, any techies out there who are good at these things? You know,
I want to hit reload would be my suggestion.
Just load it again?
Yeah.
All right, we are going to get an ad then, so I hope you can sit through. I think it's 12 seconds.
Yeah, that's what they do to you.
Yeah, right.
You said you had to pay for it.
Oh, I think
Free enterprise.
I think it's in some horrible. I am really sorry. Okay, here we are, our feature presentation. No, the volume's okay, actually.
I'm Julian DeBell. In the shops I visited, employees work 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, with maybe 1 or 2 days off a month. During the day, the night shift workers sleep in crowded dormitories just upstairs, and when night comes, they trade places with the day shift workers. In most ways, it's not that different from what you'd see in any Chinese toy factory or textile factory. What's different is the work itself. These men are paid about 25 cents an hour to play the online fantasy adventure game World of Warcraft. They spend their days killing monsters and gathering gold from the corpses. Gold that can be sold for real money to players in the West. These factories are places where the classic economic distinction between work and play has itself become a kind of fantasy. This is the life of the Chinese gold farmer.
Okay. All right, so in this video, we see some themes, again, that I think are kind of similar to the Nihao video. The opening scene shows these shirtless workers who are immediately in contact with their bodies. And I don't know why they're outside. I haven't figured that out. And we see them sleeping and smoking. Other videos by the former UCSD student have similar themes. They dwell on the kitchens of these dormitory spaces, and you see these kind of orientalizing rifles and chopsticks, and just generally bring us into the body of the Chinese gold farm. So even though the work that's being discussed is virtual, you actually see very little of that in these videos, and the Chinese body, or one depiction of it, is being constructed and placed on display. And Heeks observed, of all the reports that he read, meals and dormitory accommodation are reported as included in the pay. From field research, and this is two journalists and a student, there is a report of poor hygiene and poor food quality in some gold farms. So this kind of low culture meme is being, or theme is being sounded here again, just like you saw the pallets and the crowded conditions in the video that Julian DeBell did. And again, in 2009, I'm still seeing the same kinds of things. So the Guardian article said, after completing his shift, Lee is given a basic meal of rice, meat, and vegetables, and falls into a bunk bed in a room that 8 other gold farmers share. So although Heeks noted that the empirical base is thin, this is the theme of ubiquity, he also stated gold farming employs hundreds of thousands of people and earns hundreds of millions of dollars annually. And this might be true, or it might not be true. I don't think we really have the data. And Heeks provided the usual academic hedges in his working paper, but I see this factoid repeated in the media a lot without the academic hedges. And so I wrote to Heeks and I said, wow, where'd you get all that data? That's really interesting. And he wrote back and said, in terms of how you'd actually count how many gold farmers there are and what the real size of the real money trade market is, well, I did my best coming at it from various angles, but it is very rough and ready. I'm not even sure how you'd improve the figures. So really, I don't think we actually have any methods for figuring out what this economy is actually like. And as an anthropologist who's always really close to the data, I guess this bothers me a little bit more than it might bother other people. I realize economists have to deal with estimates, but these seem like they're really way out there to me. All right, now I want to talk about what I believe to be a more complex reality about Chinese gold farming that tends to be obscured by this simplistic view that we're getting in the videos and reports. And there's three things here. One is automation, one is the value chain, and one is the evolution of practice. Yang Ming Kao, my student who speaks Chinese natively but is from Singapore, so has a nice little bit of cultural distance from China, but it's quite effective in the fieldwork there, reports that a lot of gold farming is done with bots. Now, Yang Ming Kao is not the first one to report this. He's confirming other reports. And what he says is that a worker may be monitoring tens of machines. He is not playing the game. This isn't this kind of low-level playboard. If you're going to have bots, if you're going to make money gold farming with bots, a lot of research and development is required. You have to create the bots and you have to sustain them. And they are under constant surveillance by Blizzard and by players. So players are often aware that there's a character in the game who's playing in a very mechanical way, probably stealing your resources on the side in the Nihao video, and they report those to Blizzard. And if your bot is so obvious, you're going to have to beef it up a little bit and make it less obvious, and that requires, or move it to a new part of the game. All of this requires research. So this is technical work, intellectual work, that the gold farmers are doing, which is not represented by this image of the young guy, the shirtless guy, sitting in front of a computer playing World of Warcraft. Now, Heeks is a little bit hedgy about automation. He kind of likes this Chinese gold farmer imaginary, but he's enough of an academic to know he needs some data. So he says automation is possible, but there's little data to support or reject it. Mithra claims low-wage labor can even undercut bots, since the latter does have its costs. Now, Mithra turns out to be an American gold farmer who's upset about what Chinese gold farmers are doing because he or she is making less money. And this notion about the difference between American gold farming and Chinese gold farming comes out of his blog, which he cites. The only new component is that the Chinese are weighing in on cheap labor where American occupation is off. Honestly, I think the Chinese will win this economic contest since it takes considerable time and resources to develop a bot or discover and exploit, whereas the Chinese need only grind per the rules of the game. In fact, the only way to compete with the sweatshops in the current market is to exploit. So for better or worse, it's narrowed the field on what types of opportunities to pursue for American gold farmers. And interestingly, Heeks identifies body, this automation, as the darker side of gold farming activity. So he says, he has this pull-out quote thing, and he says, control bots and macroing are the darker side of gold farming. And he doesn't say why this is the darker side. It's all against the terms of service. So why botting is darker than sitting in front of the computer playing, I don't really know. But I think it's because it doesn't really fit very well with its narrative in this concept of what the Chinese gold farming is about. And he kind of shies away from really thinking automation is important. And he says interviews and observation of gold farmers suggest many play as ordinary characters. Now, one really good thing he does in this paper is he talks about the value chain. And this is where we get away from this simplistic notion of a young kid without a shirt sitting in front of a computer playing. And he says the value chain does include customer service, account management, advertising, and labor management. And the thing that concerns me about this Chinese gold farmer image is that it deletes this division of labor and complexity. It reduces gold farmers to laborers, and in fact to very needy, low-scale bodies positioned in front of commodity computers. And it also deletes what I went to China to study, which is the ordinary players, who are certainly not laboring in sweatshops. They're just playing World of Warcraft because they enjoy playing it the way any of the other players in the rest of the world do. And instead we find them orientalized as Chinese bodies eating rice, lying on pallets, and working for low wages in sweatshops. I think I'm kind of running out of time. I'm going to go through this really fast. So one of the things that Yang-Ming Cao has discovered that I think is really interesting is that there are consulting operations in China to help gold farmers do their work more effectively. So again, this gets away from the image of you just sit down and play a game and then suddenly you're making money. And these consulting operations, which Yang-Ming found by doing a search on Baidu, interestingly, it didn't turn up in Google, but it turned up in Baidu. I think there's some interesting methodological questions about how we even do this research. But these consulting companies suggest that you devote a lot of your income to R&D, especially initially, that you develop specialized bots, not generic ones, and that you manage output. So this is not just grinding per the rules of the game, as the American gold farmer cast Chinese gold farmers. Many companies actually have a lot of employees now. They're not just micro enterprises with 1 or 2 staff. Again, they're kind of low culture, low tech view. And there's even a group in China that is working to create a consortium to professionalize gold farming and make it more profitable. So gold farming is out there, and I think the question for us as researchers is how we can get beyond this imaginary that we have constructed and find out what it's really like. And one thing that it's really like is that it's evolving quickly. It's not stuck in what Julian Bell saw when he went to China in 2005. Yang-Ming interviewed a Chinese botter, and I'm going to just read this quote and then put it in our discussion. And he said, how do you feel about this activity? And he said, it was a feeling of empowering software to do more for you. Allowing software to take over complex tasks is the underlying nature of software, or should I say, the underlying nature of human progression, replacement of repetitive labor with advanced methods of production. So I think with our imaginary, we are missing this kind of evolution as we examine these economic practices in China. Okay, so I'll get some questions in minutes.
See, it's a very interesting comparison between the two, but I want to go back to the body. One thing I was wondering as you was reporting the reactions to the changes, have you talked to the company? It sounds like they made what you call an elementary mistake in sort of customer relations.
Yes. No, I haven't talked to the company because thus far, Dimitri, are you making any progress on talking to Blizzard?
A little, yeah.
Okay, so thus far, I haven't really had that kind of access to interview them. I would like to do that. So yes, I do think it was a mistake, and that's why I say they didn't kill the modern community. And that's why I find it especially instructive that when you get this kind of really negative reaction in a community that's actually creating a lot of value, you want to think about other ways that these communities can intersect and interact. So yes, I completely agree with that.
Well, I also have a question about the modding communities. I was wondering how they might be engaged with free and open source practices, especially in the situations where the people are developing at no cost and not soliciting donations.
Yeah, okay, I think it's related to free and open source, sort of in an intellectual or spiritual way, but the practice is a little bit different. So if you're a modder, you own, this is another thing we talk about in the paper, I couldn't get to in this talk. If you are a modder, as long as your mod, you're actively maintaining your mod, you own this mod, and nobody else can change it unless you give them permission to. So I think it's a little different than open source in that regard. Now, if you abandon your mod, and this happens all the time, people quit playing World of Warcraft or they get tired of modding. If you abandon it and it's just sitting there, in that case, another modder can pick it up. And apparently about 6 months is sort of the heuristic after which it's okay to pick it up. And then you own that mod. And then you're in charge of it, and it's kind of your baby. And then you can tell other people not to change it unless you give them permission. So that's the ethos in the modding community. A little bit different, I think, than open source.
I was wondering if what kind of comparison you would make between the gold farming community and, say, the hacker community. Because the hacker community seems to me to have a number of characteristics that are similar to the gold farming community, at least in terms of how they're characterized by those who are outside the community compared to those who are members of the community. The inside?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. And some Chinese modders call themselves hackers, the ones who are developing the bots. And they do recognize that they are seen as sort of outsiders, and that bothers them in terms of World of Warcraft, being part of the World of Warcraft community. But the idea, this kind of empowerment that this person spoke about in this quote, where you are able to go in and change things and modify the software, make it do what you want to do, that's part of the hacker ethos. And I think that's going on with the gold farming as well. It's a really good empirical question.
I'm wondering if you saw much migration of the Chinese mods to American mods or vice versa. When you say the modding community,
yeah.
is it very much one community? Are there separate communities, and was there a similar reaction in China to the rules, which I assume were similarly applied?
Yeah, fantastic questions. Okay, so as far as we can tell, we actually have a whole paper on this, and I'd be glad to send it to anybody. They are pretty separate communities. We did a count of the mods, and even though there's actually about twice as many Chinese players as American players, American modders produce many, many more mods than Chinese. It turns out that what's going on in the Chinese modding community is that a lot of what they're doing is just developing the idea of an online community. So we've had online communities since kind of the late 60s, or however far back you want to go. It's part of our culture now. We know how to do that. For the Chinese, this is much newer. So they're just learning about how to behave in online communities, what it means to be. There's this Chinese term, pouring water, which means you just kind of, there's a lot of kind of drivel in the conversation. It's not a very good conversation, and some of the Chinese modders have been taught not to pour water. Now, you don't have to do that in an American modding community, because they already know, because they've been doing this stuff probably since they were 13. So there's a lot of kind of teaching about what it means to be a citizen in an online community that's part of what's going on in China, which I think accounts for this disparity in the number of mods. I think there's less technical expertise, and so some of the best modders in China end up just training the other ones how to do any kind of modding at all, where you get a fairly high level of technical capability in the American community. So that was the first part of your question. Oh, and about the reaction, I don't know, and we haven't looked on the website. That's a really good question. I need to get you on the email. It's really hard for me because I don't read or speak Chinese. I have to rely on someone who has that kind of access. But really, really good question.
Wally.
Following on Peter's question about hacking,
If the gold farmers are so disliked by the players, why haven't sophisticated players developed mods that would help Blizzard identify the gold farmers and quarantine them? Do you see anything like that happen?
Yeah, I haven't seen that happen, and I think part of the reason, I mean, there may be mods out there that do that kind of thing. Part of the reason is that the game is changing all the time. And so, you know, this business about the R&D, that's real. The game changes a lot. So whatever your bot is doing now, in 2 months it might not work very well anymore, and you have to change it. And so somebody who wrote a mod to go after the farmers would also have to write a mod to, you know, change the mod that went after the farmers. And people are, this is a leisure activity. People are there to have fun. They're not really there to help Blizzard make more money, even though they are very, very annoyed by the farmers. But that's a good question. I need to find out if there are any mods like that. That's a very good question.
The person behind Wally.
We heard about the backlash in the American community against the Chinese gold farmers. How do Chinese players feel about Chinese gold farmers?
Yes, that is a tale yet to be told. That's a really, really good question. Yongming Kao is doing research on that. The ethos toward buying gold is very, very different in China. So it's completely fine to buy it in China. It's just part of the way you play the game is that in some ways it's a more social game. So Americans are very competitive and performance is really important. And if you have a particular item on your character, you really need to have gotten that item yourself to get kind of the full social value out of it. If you just buy it, it doesn't really mean anything. But in China, it's different. And I've really been wanting to buy the battered hilt, but I won't let myself because I know it won't have the same meaning in the game. But in China, that's just fine. And so there's a very, very different kind of ethos. And this is another empirical study that somebody needs to do about Chinese feel very relaxed about buying gold, and Americans don't.
It kind of makes me think about our feelings about piracy. I wonder if there's any connection.
Yeah, you know, it's an iceberg, and I think we haven't even seen the tip of it, actually. Very, very good question.
Okay, last question.
This is actually kind of a follow-up question, but I've done work on sort of the imaginary supply chain of counterfeit luxury goods, and it has a lot of parallels, except in the discourse, it seems that a lot of the focus of vilification falls upon the consumers of counterfeit luxury goods rather than the producers, who are painted more as victims. And so I'm curious why you think the villainization has fallen upon the farmers rather than on the American consumers of gold.
Okay, well there is, actually there is some of that. Players who buy things are often pointed out as like eBay characters in a very negative way. So in World of Warcraft, sometimes you group with people who you don't know. There's a mechanism for doing that because you want to accomplish something. And if somebody's playing really badly, some of the other players will whisper to each other, oh my God, that's an eBay character. So it's, so they're really looked down on. And the idea that you did not earn, this is probably very American, what you have in the game is actually considered to be bad. It's just that it's hard to identify them. If you're out trying to get some resources and you see someone who is very repetitively farming, or there's a bot there, you can identify that. But I also think it's this techno-orientalism. I think it's our own insecurity about who we are in the global economy, and we're picking on these supposedly low-tech Chinese gold farmers, and that's kind of the impulse behind the imaginary.
Okay, for those of you who didn't get to ask your questions, should we, Dr. Nardi, be around for just a few minutes? Before we put our hands together, we have a couple quick announcements. I neglected to mention that Dr. Nardi's talk is sponsored by the Annenberg program on online communities. The next outside speaker from the Annenberg program will be Kareem O'Connor from Harvard University in April. We also have Collins Head and Jeff Cole in that series. And I'm going to hand it over to Peter to talk about next week, and then we can give a big round of applause.
Wait. Our speaker next week is Michael Deli Carpini, who is the Dean of the Sister Annenberg School at the University of Pennsylvania. He's going to be talking on talking together, ? Discursive participation and political deliberations in the U.S. So be sure to come next week to hear Michael Annenberg say something.
How about a big round?